Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues and friends. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Moscow Urban Forum. We had a very energizing plenary session, and I'm the program director of this event, and I'm delighted to see you here at this first session. Today we are discussing the global issue, and also we have a number of sessions which are related to urban development of Russian cities, to interoperability of citizens and municipal authorities. But today we'll be talking about ratings and indices. This is a very interesting topic which is widely discussed sometimes. And at the plenary session, mayors used to say a lot about these ratings, and ratings seem to be the tool which measure the development of a city. So it's a measurement mechanism. And in the world, now we have quite a number of ratings, and one of our speakers today will outline the overall number of these ratings, and there are more than 150 of these indices. And all these indices, they are widely discussed in the press, they draw attention of the public, they are discussed by the mayors, but apart from the media aspect of this issue, we also would like to know whether these indices do impact the decision-making process, whether they matter for decisions of investors, decisions made by the public, whether these indices should be taken into account at all, and should the city development be tailored to these ratings? Is that the right strategy? And if the city does not perform well in these ratings, is it bad or not? So we have a number of these issues to discuss, and we have a well-represented panel of experts. We have Hazem Galel, a partner and the world leader of this sector for the state and municipal governance of PwC. And PwC is a traditional researcher, I would say, and it makes research of the biggest indices for the developing countries, and he will come up with the fresh report. We got Sergei Lovkin, the head of city building department of the city of Moscow, and Sergei Lovkin is responsible for positioning of Moscow in a number of areas which are important for city building. That is related to doing business rating, for example, and he will give an outline of the vision Moscow government takes at these indices and the position Moscow should have in a number of these indices. Also, we have Sergei Borisovich Dridze, the head of Department of Foreign Economic and International Relations of Moscow, and he will speak about the investment appeal of the city. And we also have Greg Clark, a speaker who we already know from the plenary session, the senior researcher of UALI and the senior researcher and an expert in the area of assessing urban development. And Greg will give us an outline of Moscow's performance in a number of these indices. Mary Jane Crisanta Ortega, the Vice President of Global Executive Committee of ICLEI from Philippines. This is a well-known international organization which is dealing with issues of international and sustainable development. We also have Martin Powell, the head of urban development of Siemens in the Crystal Research Center, and he will tell us about the Green Cities Index, and he will tell us about how these cities should perform in the area of sustainable development. Andres Mendoza Peña, the co-author of the Global Cities Index and the head of Strategy, Marketing and Trade Practice Department of A.T. Kearney. And we also have Dmitry Grishenkov, a representative of the International Group of Rating Agencies and the scientific editor of Expert magazine and the head of the biggest Russian rating agencies. But this agency is not dealing with rating cities, and we will ask the question why. We also have Denis Sokolov, who is the head of research department of Russian office of Cushman and Wakefield, and we also have Angelika Winkler, the deputy head of city planning department from the mayoral office of Vienna in Austria. We have a number of presentations to be shown today, and we have quite a number of things to go through, so we are slightly pressed for time, and I'm delighted to give this floor to Hazem. He will be our first speaker.
Everybody, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again, back to Moscow. Shortly after the first snow of Moscow, so it's always great to see how a city looks like, you know, at its best. It's also good to see a lot of the panel members, some of them friends, basically, that have been, that I've known for many years. What I'd like to do over the next 15 minutes is to actually go over, some critique and update on what's happening with global ratings worldwide for cities. Then I would like to dive into the details of the results of the most recent rating that we're publishing actually today, and then finally conclude with the so what. What does this all mean for Moscow and other cities that are involved? So to start out with, why do we bother? Why do cities sometimes get so obsessed with ratings, and why do companies like ourselves and other organizations really bother about ratings? First of all, I always say ratings are important, but it's not really about the numbers. It's about what can you do to change the numbers and improve and build on these capabilities that you have and address those shortcomings or improvement opportunities that are identified. So in a way, they are a transparent way that a city can get compared to its peers and learn from other cities and best practices, but customized to the context of a given city. And there are so many different types of ratings. Some of them are comprehensive, like the one we do every year, Cities of Opportunity. Other ratings as well are being done. Then some others are more focused on the ease of doing business, on the ecosystem that a company would be more interested in, so they're more focused on the business environment. Others are on the other extreme, focused on livability exclusively. And then we see sector-specific ratings, ICT readiness, mobility, and so forth. So our challenge, basically, when we try to do our ratings, is first of all to use reliable data sources. We all know who are involved with ratings that not always you would find every single variable you would like at the city level, so sometimes we have to use proxies from the national level. Sometimes we also have the challenge of working with data that might be 1 year old or 18-month-old. Sometimes if you're going to use third-party data from the World Bank or from other reliable sources, there is that lag effect. And then also you want to make sure that you're capturing some of the unique aspects about context. I am personally involved with an ISO standard that's being developed for cities, because everybody realized that we need to be speaking a common language about city indicators or smart infrastructure. So I'm involved with these two processes myself as a representative of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So there is an awareness that we need to standardize the way we look at cities, but also you need to always choose the peers that you're comparing to. And that was the idea of doing this Emerging 7 or E7 publication that I'm going to be talking about. So how do ratings influence some of these different stakeholders? As I mentioned before, policymakers would need to always address some of the impacts of the policies and the decisions they've made and see really how they have affected performance over not just immediate outputs, but medium and long term in terms of outcomes, and in the longer term, impact as well. As I said before, it's used as a tool for self-reflection and for really self-assessment and comparing to your peers. For the citizens, they would use some of these ratings to understand basically where would they like to move. In the US, people move a lot, maybe not so much here in Russia, but other parts of the world, citizens and people have actually looked at some of these ratings to make some of these decisions, and they become very proud. You know, when they're living in one of the most livable cities in Europe or in the world, that's a sense or a source of pride for citizens. And then for investors, many times we get actually, and when we first started publishing the Cities of Opportunity report, we thought that the main audience will be city managers, mayors, and so forth. But we were absolutely surprised with the number of multinationals that would come to us from different sectors like insurance, consumer goods, and would ask us, well, we're planning to expand to country X or to region Y, and we've looked at your report. Can you help us further elaborate on what is it really it's going to take for us to set up business there, and would it be attractive for some of our employees to relocate or not? So businesses also look at these very seriously. When we do our Cities of Opportunity report, which is kind of like our flagship report, we look at three main areas: what we call the tools for changing the world, intellectual capital and innovation, technological readiness, and the city as a gateway in terms of hotels, the airport infrastructure, and so forth. And then we look at economics, the economic cloud that the city has, and I'm going to go into more details of what are the variables that come under each one of these areas: ease of doing business and the cost of living and conducting business in a city. We also look at quality of life with respect to health, safety, security, the demographics, the livability, the mobility in the city, and the infrastructure. And we just published, actually this year, the 6th edition, and we're already working on the 7th edition. We always have like about 27 to 30 cities, and so that you know, when I finish this presentation here, I'm going tomorrow to the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, a meeting with the mayor there and the economic board, because they have requested us, even though Amsterdam was not included in the Cities of the Opportunity report, to do a special benchmark for them so that they can understand what policies actually they need to do. So that's what I talked about in terms of the different areas of the report. We were actually asked about a couple of years ago to do a special edition of the report for what we call the E7, or the emerging 7 countries that have high traditional economic growth. I know last year hasn't been very good for the BRICS, Russia, Brazil, and to some extent China, relatively speaking, and Turkey have not grown, even though Turkey is not from the BRICS, but it's part of what we call the E7, together with Mexico and Indonesia. So we wanted to compare the leading or the largest cities from these 7 countries that have traditionally had high economic growth and really see how they compare to each other. And we do that quite a lot. We take a group of cities, we've done it for the Nordic cities that have a lot in common, we've done it for some African cities, and we've done it for the emerging 7 cities as well. So that's the background of the report. Here are the 7 cities that I mentioned. And we also have India, represented by Mumbai, Jakarta, Beijing, Mexico City, Sao Paulo from Brazil, and of course, Moscow. So what did we find out? What are the main highlights as compared to the last time we did the survey? First of all, Beijing actually continues to be in the lead, but the gap between Beijing and Sao Paulo is smaller this year. Between Beijing and Moscow is smaller this year as it were last year, right? Some of the other things that we see, that Moscow has actually increased in technological readiness. It has increased in the ranking and the performance in transportation and infrastructure. And in some of the other presentations by the representatives of the city, you will hear from them on some of the projects and the policies that have changed the needle and led to these improvements. And has also become a little bit better with respect to the cost indicator health, safety, and security. However, on the other hand, it dropped in intellectual capital and innovation, and also the variable or the collection of variables related to the city being a city gateway. In the interest of time, I'm going to go a little bit faster with respect to some of the different components. This is just some of the movements, the significant ones that we've had in this report. We're going to have copies of the report for you. Get into it. You'll see all the details over there. But you would see, for example, that in technological readiness, this year Moscow is in the top. Yeah? In intellectual capital and innovation, even though the performance was lower, it's still in second place. So you always need to take some of these positions, not only looking at where you are today, but what's the trend? How are you doing with your performance over time? Because you shouldn't be happy if you're in the second place, but your performance has, in relative terms, has dropped as compared to the last year. One example here, intellectual capital. You see that one of the areas really that we could work on is, even though, you know, right now we're in third place in terms of world university rankings, this is something that can get possibly improved. And we have the same issue, for example, in Amsterdam, yeah? And sometimes it's not a matter of the absolute performance of the university, but how much the university is being forthcoming and marketing itself to the rest of the world and getting the top talent from all over the world, yeah? Libraries with public access is one area that Moscow dropped relative to its peers. So these are kind of like the different ways we're showing it, where Moscow has actually dropped, we show it in red, where it has improved, we show it in green, with the number of positions relative to the other 6 cities. Technological readiness, Moscow is in the top place, yeah, in terms of internet access into schools, moved 2 places up, and also in terms of creating, you know, what we call the ecosystem and the results for software and multimedia development design. So the industry, you know, related to IT have definitely improved. Now, where it ranks a little bit low, as you can see here, is what we call in the digital economy score. How do you take ICT applications and make them become part of your economy in a more sustainable way? City as a gateway, number of hotel rooms, yeah, but the number of international tourists. And remember, these are lag indicators. So we're working here with data from 2013 primarily. Now, maybe because of some of the conditions in the region, you know, we have to monitor the number of international tourists in 2014. Remember, there's always that lag effect when you look at these numbers. Transportation and infrastructure, public transportation system went up 1 place, but the cost of public transportation in relative terms went down 1 place. And the one important jump that we see here in terms of the number of licensed taxis. Even though I took the train today from the airport because I knew about the snow, it was interesting when I landed to see many people wearing sort of like the taxi, sort of like accredited type taxi, because that has always been one of the main issues that you find here in Moscow. Health, safety and security, 2 places up with respect to safety and security, but with respect to crime, 1 place down. Sustainability and the natural environment, yeah, moved up the rank a little bit because we redefined here also the method of calculation of what constitutes thermal comforts, but with respect to air pollution went down a few places, you know, in its relative ranking. Demographics and livability, Moscow does very well, yeah, in many of the areas, but where Beijing actually manages to take the first place is in terms of the working age population, because we know the demographics in Moscow, even though it attracts a lot of young talents from the rest of Russia, overall it is not a young city in terms of the working age population as it compares to Beijing. Yeah. Economic clout, again Moscow, productivity has improved. Real GDP rate of growth, you know, is not very good. It has been a difficult set of 2 years. And when we think at some of the things happening, you know, at the national level with the oil prices coming down, let's make sure that that doesn't impact the city in terms of its economic activities, and it has some kind of like financial sustainability on its own, not only receive funding from the national level. Ease of doing business, I want to focus on this area because this is an area where Moscow can really improve. And it becomes very important as the competition for FDI keeps increasing. And in terms of the operational risk climate, that is an area that actually is impacted more on terms of what's happening on the national level, because we're using here one of the indicators that's measured at the national level, but also in terms of the other variables Moscow can improve, for example, in the level of shareholder protection, yeah? And that's driven also by some national policies. These are the two variables where it has scored the lowest. Cost, you can see here, cost of living is still relatively high, and cost of business occupancies. So in the interest of time, because I know we have so many interesting speakers here that we want to hear from, to wrap it up in terms of the way forward, and I mentioned early on, it is not about the numbers. Forget about the numbers and all of that. They're interesting, they serve as a baseline, but it's the discussion that happens after the numbers and the so what and the way forward in terms of the strength, what we say, what Moscow can be proud of to build on, and where Moscow can learn to further improve in terms of, as I mentioned before, the performance of the universities, encouraging entrepreneurship, attracting more international meetings and conferences, the MICE industry as we call it, law enforcement and shareholder protection, and more importantly, building and promoting more the city brand. But it also has quite a few things to be proud of, as I mentioned before, in terms of the internet connectivity that we spoke about. It has very good employee regulations that protect the employee. Maybe sometimes we would argue too much for some of the multinationals. It has a lot of green parks and public space. And it becomes very important also how to create the other drivers of entrepreneurship so that really they would contribute more to the economy of the city through small and medium enterprises. Out of time, thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Hazem, thanks for being virtually on time. It's an exciting presentation, and we heard that we heard why ratings are needed, how they can be assessed. We saw the details, intricacies of your rating, and saw the advantages and disadvantages of Moscow in the rating. Please allow me to ask you a couple of questions, and then I give the floor to Sergey. And my first question concerns to what extent do you believe is justified comparison of Moscow with other peer cities in your panel? On the one hand, it is understandable that these are BRICS countries, it's rapidly growing economies, but to what extent it is adequate to compare Moscow and, say, Beijing or Jakarta? And is it a correct, actually good, and does it give good ideas to our city planners? And the second question is, we definitely have some specificity in working in development countries because this data is hard to obtain, and it's very difficult to update this data of the developing countries. What will be your advice to Moscow and other developing countries and cities in with regard to working with international ratings to improve its position in international ratings?
Thank you for the two questions. Let me start by saying that Moscow is very fortunate because it's actually part of two different publications that we do. The first one is the global one, where it actually gets compared also to London, to Paris, to Singapore, and more of the sort of like the so-called lead cities, you know, around the world in terms of some of the practices. But it also gets compared to this, last year was an outlier because Brazil, its economy didn't grow. You know, some of these E7, which have been traditionally even sometimes double-digit growth, have slowed down, some of them last year. But I still think it's really an interesting comparison, because when you are growing as a city at a high rate, the economy, one of your biggest challenges, unlike highly developed, stable cities, is how do you're kind of like improving the ship as you're sailing it at a very high speed. So you need to develop and create modern infrastructure. You have investment coming into your city. You want to attract talent. You want to do all these things, but at the same time, not sacrifice the quality of living for your own cities. So that was the main rationale that we included Moscow in the global study that we do, and B, thought for the second year now it was very interesting to compare. And notice it's not the BRICS, it's the E7, because these emerging 7 countries we still believe are going to be very important to drive economic growth around the world. For the second question, data reliability is an issue. And if you ask me, how would I like to conduct this exercise, I would like to also focus on the metropolitan areas around a city, because they're kind of like an integrated part of the overall city economy. But the data oftentimes is primarily on the national level, sometimes at the city level, and rarely at the metropolitan or regional level. So, you know, we want to be, and that's something that I always try to emphasize in all the international meetings, that we need the multilaterals to start measuring data more at the city level, provided with very good and reliable and trustable input from the cities and the regions. But that means you need to create and strengthen, in some cases where it already exists, the statistics and the data collection type capabilities within the municipality or within the city itself, and make sure it's reliable. I mean, we've all read the news about some of the data that was being discarded from Argentina because it was not, at the national level, it was not reliable, and the IMF is not confident in some of this data. So transparency is very important here, because at the end of the day, if you don't report data in a transparent way, the citizens won't believe you, and the rest of the world won't believe you.
Thank you very much, Hazem. Спасибо, Hazem.
Hazem, many thanks. And I give the floor to Sergei Levkin. And maybe you can say a few words about your feelings about the previous presentation, to what extent this position of Moscow is accurate, and we will be also very happy to learn what is your progress in urban development. Vasily, thanks. Good afternoon, dear friends. In the last 24 hours before this session, I changed several times my mind about the way I need to do my presentation. And I had several ideas, and I selected something in between from what I wanted to say. And there are some reasons for it. Definitely, the ratings, it's an important tool for investors, for international community, for the governments, and for citizens and of the country of origin, and for other countries. And what 3 years ago, for the first time, Moscow was started to treat ratings as an important feature, and not something which is irrelevant. We understood that it is without these ratings we cannot achieve harmonious development of Moscow. And 2-3 years ago, we started to evaluate ourselves and compared the doing business rating of the Global Bank on issuing the licenses for construction. And for the second time, second year, we are already watching all ratings existing in the world, and especially PricewaterhouseCoopers ratings on urban development, and this we see our position of in 7 cities, and we do reviews of these ratings, and we identify our problems and other issues. We know that there is hard to compare the cities based on the regional data, which doesn't read the specificity. And at the same time, I have a very clear determination why we need to do this comparison. Every city has its history of development, and Evgeny Shuvalov told about it. And Moscow has its own history, which is different from all other cities. And here we have already an established message in urban development, some limitations, organic limitations, which cannot be compared with peer cities, and therefore you need to have a better understanding of these historic aspects. And two more words, and why we decided to ask PricewaterhouseCoopers to do a dedicated study on Moscow on our statement of work. What we see now in the ratings, and you can see the status, the current status of the city on some indicators, and you can see it in development for 3-4 years. And thanks for presenting it, and we are very pleased that Moscow is second, and we are very actually chasing the leaders, and some other indicators we are even more successful than other peer cities. But I'm just asking myself, what will be our place in 3, 5, 6 years? Here we need to assess, as I believe, the urban issues, and what are we doing now and what other cities are doing, because what is being built now will give results in 5, 6 years. So today we do the metro, the underground, and we will see the impact only in 3, 5 years in the rating and in everything else. And the footage of residential spaces, investments per capita, and so on. And this efforts, our efforts, will be reflected in the rating as only in 3, 5 years. And therefore, we did our own rating on 16 parameters, and we compared ourselves with 11 cities, not only BRICS countries, but London, Berlin, New York. And I can state that, and I would like to thank PricewaterhouseCoopers for their very business-like approach to this effort, and for very diligence and accuracy. And we saw that Moscow has a tremendous potential, and we have issues we need to focus on. And we are among the leaders, and the trends which are already invested there and set by the mayor of the city, they are correct. And the dynamics, it's higher, significantly higher, even of some leading cities like Beijing. It might be surprising, but it is still a fact. And we will continue doing this collaboration with rating agencies. We believe this work is important. And I would like to wish that when the ratings are set, more attention should be paid to the raw data, to the regional data. Say, the doing business rating of the Global Bank, we were virtually the last 3 years ago. And 2 years ago, it was on the 178th place. And in 2 years, we moved to 156th place. And with this 42 procedures on the sample site, we out of 42 procedures, we have only 21 procedure. And when we started to ask an expert of the Global Bank, which resides in Moscow and has an office in Moscow, but they still do the assessment in a remote way online, and when we ask the questions, and the investors quite often doesn't understand that they're speaking about kind of a sample example of 1,500 square meters with the infrastructure should be connected, and it is 10 times less than. And these respondents believe that the questionnaire is about just a residential building they're building. And then when we started to demonstrate it to the global bank expert, and they thank us, and they made corrections. And I believe that these nuances can play a significant role. Sergey, thank you. And I have a couple of questions to you. And the first one: does Moscow have a specific aim in improving its position in international ratings? Do you set this goal for yourself? Is there an order or a strategy with this regard? For doing business rating, it's in the roadmap of our president. And these were his behests or instructions after the presidential campaign, and jointly with his federal authorities we're implementing it, and the outcomes were actually described, and we see that we work very carefully with the initial data, and we believe that we have actually 11 procedures, but not 21, but we couldn't prove it in a short period of time. And now I would like to express my opinion. For the last 6 months, we were very intensively collaborating with my colleagues, and Evgenia Shaposhnik, I'd like to thank her, because it was her that understood we are serious about these ratings. And what was there in the program, it's our mini plan, short plan for the coming years. And it's very hard to hold the leading title in sports, and after this forum, I will, at the meeting with the mayor, I will insist that we have 16 different federal programs, but we need to include certain efforts to improve the ratings where we are doing not that well. To improve our image. Sergey, thank you very much. I give the floor to Gret Clark, who will speak about Moscow positioning in numerous ratings. And Greg.
Mr. Lyovkin mentioned several important things. So, probably as a start of your speech, one thing is the bias of those who are asked to answer questions. Right? It's the question: whom do you ask, and how informed are people, and how relevant they are. In this sense, at least the feeling in Russia is that many rankings are based on the opinions of people somewhere, and they just don't know the real situation on the ground. The other interesting thing is that yes, some of the decisions that will influence the rankings are done now, but they will influence the rankings in 3 or 5 years. So it's a question of a moving target, right? Because you can set it as a target now, but in these 3-5 years, this target can shift. So probably a short comment on this, and then to your report. Thank you.
Actually, the answer to both of these questions is in my slides. So can I...
Ну, ответ на эти вопросы вы увидите в моей презентации.
Okay. Friends, we live in an urban age, but the science of cities is slow to emerge. And one of the reasons we've become so interested in city rankings and indexes is because they form a kind of approximation of a performance management system and a performance perception system for cities. In 2009, I published a report that looked at 100 indexes In 2011, we looked at 140. In 2013, 157. And next year, we'll publish a report that looks at 200 city indexes. I'm not involved with any one city index. I observe the indexes and try to comment on what they say. In this presentation, I try to answer 3 questions very quickly. What is Moscow's performance in the indexes? 2, is Moscow's performance in the indexes fair or unfair? This is your question, Vasily. And 3, what would Moscow have to do to change its performance in the index? This is your second question. So Moscow appears in a large number of indexes. There's more than 200 indexes that seem to matter. About 25 of these are very good, very well constructed indexes, like PwC, like Siemens, like Global Power City Index, that are also here in the room. And Moscow has 76 performances, 15 out of 20 of the top indexes, and 89% of appearances in all of the global indexes. In this sense, Moscow is the 4th most indexed city that there is in the world, and you can see where it performs and how it performs. Of the 76 indexes that Moscow is in, you can see the different indexes that it appears in here. Their focus, the questions they ask, the answers they provide. And if you want to put it this way, Moscow appears strongly in the all-round studies of city performances. It's very prominent in studies of finance, economy, investment patterns, technology, transport. It's less visible in the indexes that are concerned with environmental issues, because I think there are some data problems there, and it's less prominent at the moment in studies of brands, governance, and smart cities. How has Moscow fared over time? In the last 6 years, Moscow's performance across all of the indexes is broadly stable. Moscow's performance is stable, and we're living in a very dynamic world. So stable is generally good. It's in the upper tier of the emerging world cities, and you heard Gazem talk brilliantly about all of that just a minute ago. It's falling slightly as some of the other cities become recognized and more cities emerge. But if you look over the longer term, or we go back, to 2014, what you will see is that it's really coming up. There's a slide miss. Here we are. It's really coming up in a number of indexes, particularly if you look at its integration into the global economy. It's become more prominent than Mexico City, Buenos Aires, and Taipei, and only a few of the fast-growing global cities where the pace of change is extremely fast have taken it over. So in globalization terms, Moscow's doing well. In investment terms, Moscow is doing very well. Comparing the FDI cities of the future, where it's stable, and the PwC, ULI emerging trends, you can see Moscow's jump from 2010 to 2014. It's a very strong investment destination due to market size, labor force, economic potential, corporate presence. All of these things score high. And improved recognition for real estate. As you can see, Moscow ranks alongside Paris for real estate investment. If we look at, firstly, brand, the next thing, you can see that generally Moscow's performance in brand is improving. Its political and cultural influence is widely recognized. Gazem made the point about universities, very important point. It's associated with liveliness and fun. Moscow's a dynamic, energetic city. It's less associated with attractiveness and welcome. Its reputation is strongest in India and China that know it, weaker in Sweden and Japan, when you look across these kinds of indexes. When you look at finance, Moscow is doing well, considerably improved since 2008, but the competition here is very, very strong. And it's easy for a city to get better, but also to decline in the rankings if other cities are getting better even faster. That's the case with financial centers. Other cities have emerged and grown more quickly. So, are the rankings fair? In my opinion, when you look across these rankings, you look at natural disasters, FDI, park space, dynamic young population, transport size, passenger flows, political importance. Moscow scores very highly in most of these rankings, and this looks to me to be fair. These scores are fair, they accurately represent where Moscow is. But if you look at some of the places where Moscow doesn't perform so well, you can see that there are explanations or limitations in how the rankings are constructed that may explain it. On climate and congestion, Moscow's low scores are probably correct, and I don't think anybody in the room will argue with that. But on the issues of housing and the appeal for foreign talent, the health system, the system of punctuality for aeroplanes and other things, I think there are questions about whether the data is correct, whether the perspectives are right, whether there is bias built into the system. So if we summarize it in this way, could it be that some of the rankings where Moscow comes down have a kind of Western bias? Global appeal, expat perceptions, they don't really track the patterns of migration properly. But there's certain biases of lifestyle preferences and climate preferences that are there. Could it be data limitations? Could it be the way the indexes are weighted towards particular perspectives? When we look at how cities improve their position in the benchmarks, what we discover is, firstly, sometimes it's to do, of course, with city performance. It's also, though, very importantly to do with competition. As I said before, you can be getting better, but your ranking position can fall. If you look at Rio de Janeiro and Helsinki, you can see this, I think, very well. Can also change your position in the rankings because they offer different results. Sometimes rankings on the same questions don't really agree with each other. If you look at the Global Cities Index and the EIU hotspots, you'll find slightly different measures and perceptions of how Moscow is doing and how other cities are doing. You'll also see that sometimes new information or data becomes available, and Gazem spoke about this, the importance of new measures, new dimensions being added. This can change the performance of individual cities that are more ready for it. And then, of course, there are new methodologies. So what could Moscow do if it wanted to change its position in the rankings? Well, the first thing is the thing that Gazem talked about. We have to improve performance in a number of areas. Human capital, technology readiness, there's the city gateway functions, transport and infrastructure, economic clout. But changing performance is only one part of changing position in the rankings. We can also change perceptions, make Moscow's assets more visible, raise awareness of Moscow's progress, highlight Moscow's brand in Asia, which is very strong, get more of the benefit of the doubt, and help the world to understand the things the world doesn't quite understand. So that's a second strategy. A third strategy is to change the way data is collected and gathered. In other words, to have an information strategy from the city that tries to provide information in ways that makes it count in the rankings. There are many examples here. Making sure the conventions count, making sure that local level data is available, tracking R&D. The fourth idea, of course, is to change the rankings. There are new rankings being created every year, 43 new rankings in the last year. Which are the rankings that will be most appropriate for Moscow to use and to develop? And it seems to me that there are many rankings, like fiscal situation, which are not very well developed, where Moscow would score very well. And then the last point, of course, is to change the rankings. Sometimes cities working together to pursue a new ranking or to persuade the rankings providers to change their methodology is a very key thing to do. So to summarize, Moscow has areas of great strength across the 200 rankings. Relative to other emerging world cities, as Gazem explained, Moscow is doing very well. Moscow is also doing well in relation to Paris and other established world cities. There are some obvious weaknesses in the rankings that I explained. Some are fair, some are not fair. Rankings have problems of data availability, methodology, categorization, and bias. The 5-point strategy I suggested is one way to start to change Moscow's appearance and perception through the rankings, and I'm sure that the continued progress of Moscow will begin to show over time. Vasily, thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Just a short question, probably. So you mentioned kind of two-way strategy of improving cities' position and rankings. Is One is actually improving the performance against the indicators, and the other one is changing the perception, which to me sounds more like a PR job, basically, or something like, correct me if I'm wrong. So question is, can you name the examples of cities that improved dramatically using this perception changing approach?
Well, it's very easy to observe, of course, that Copenhagen has more or less declared itself the capital of climate change and has more or less moved up the ranking as a result, not because it's just PR, but because it's about making assets and performance more visible. On the other hand, if you look back 25 years, the third city in Europe was always Milano. Milano has moved down the rankings from the third city in Europe to the 20th city or the 15th city in Europe. Why is that? Because there's been no attempt to systematically communicate Milano's improvements. And even though Milano has improved relative to Barcelona and Madrid and Tel Aviv and other cities, it hasn't improved that much.
Interesting. Thank you, Greg. Я передаю слово Martin.
Now I give the floor to Martin Powell.
Great, thank you. Dobry den. I will now switch to English. There are many instruments, hundreds actually, we've already heard. None are perfect. Nobody really uses the results to compare themselves with other cities. But it's actually the process of participation in these models where the real value is gained. So the real question actually is, what do we need to measure? And we actually need to measure the things that matter. And I know that sounds very simple, but poverty, terrorism, urban unrest, and flooding are increasing in every major city in the world without exception, driven mainly by pressure of population growth, urbanization. But the fact that these are increasing without exception means that cities have to evolve and think differently about how they measure their performance. The way cities will compete is changing. Driving growth, investment, and attracting new businesses is becoming tougher and more important for cities to really survive. And protecting and optimizing our infrastructure is key. Hubs of industry and business really need to create new jobs, and actually new types of jobs as well. We need to protect, let's try that again. We need to protect the things that make our cities livable. Better homes, high quality schools, high quality environment, real access to high quality green spaces. And our workforce is shrinking, despite growth, forcing us to think about the way we really manage our city assets more effectively. Our populations are getting older, we're having fewer children in an urbanized society. And we need to measure the resilience of all of our services. So if we do all of that, then actually these right measures will enable us to invest properly. This is New York. This is a brand new transport hub, much the same as they've done in London. They're building these transport hubs with high-speed connections, multimodal interchanges. These are not transport solutions, as obvious as that might seem. These are economic solutions, and they've attained their investment through having a business case that uses those measures for economic improvement for the city rather than transport measures. And actually, smaller investments can have equally beneficial outcomes. We know in Moscow that cars looking for parking adds 10% to traffic in the city. So if you can solve the problem of people looking for parking, you reduce car traffic by 10%, this could have a phenomenal change to the way the city performs. And this can be done with very simple technology. The age of digitalization has ensured that we can provide that kind of technology and improve citizens' lives very quickly. So what do we aspire to? Well, This is Shanghai. They're investing in huge IT upgrades across the city so that they can make their building stock much more effective, much higher quality, so that they can steal London's finance centre away from London and bring it to Shanghai. So this is a super way of being very competitive as a city. Istanbul has a citywide energy efficiency program that puts long-term unemployed, retrains them into green jobs and employs them for these citywide initiatives. So you're solving an economic problem as well as a green one and improving the city. And another world-class example actually is right here in Moscow. This is slow to change. So Moscow's new territories really bringing out it loses its, there we go. Its new territories are looking at not just creating new spaces outside of Moscow, but also solving some of the challenges within the existing city as it grows into these new territories. And this is a really world-class way of thinking about, again, citywide competition. So a better set of measures. Well, we have the Green City Index. Siemens published this 5 years ago, and it's already out of date. So the one thing about these models is they date very quickly. It's positive, it ranks cities against one another. It caused an awful lot of arguments between cities on how they were measured, how they sat in the rankings. London sat one place below Paris. This caused international uproar. The issue with these kind of indices is that they're only looking at one lens. So they look at important measures, basic infrastructure needs for the city, captured through CO2 emissions, energy consumption, water, waste, etc. What cities want in these kind of indices are to be judged on a fair basis, okay? But not judged for poor results. And the problem with these sorts of indices are that cities spend a lot of time defending poor results rather than learning from others about how they can do a lot better. We developed a brand new tool building on the Green City Index that's much more outcome focused. It applies technology levers on a city-by-city basis and uses the same measurement platform but shows different future scenarios by modelling what's possible if a city makes different technology choices to evolve and to become a better city. And we believe that this is the future of these kind of measurement models, are using them not to see where you're ranked and compared, but seeing what's possible based on the data that you get. If we applied these technology levers across all of the C40 cities, of which Moscow is a member, you would have over 10 years, you would have an immediate 30% reduction in CO2, a 25% improvement in air quality, which in Moscow would be significant, a huge investment value, and 22 million additional jobs across those cities. This is significant. And if you look across the data we've got already, some of the trends, they're encouraging. We're seeing in the big cities across the world, as they grow, as GDP per capita grows, the amount of motor car use is actually declining. So these big cities are beginning to use this data, use these forms of measurement to understand how it can best evolve its city. And now some of these patterns are beginning to emerge. Using measurement to run scenarios, it's much easier to show the accumulated benefits. You can now connect your buildings to much smarter energy grids, so you have fewer brownouts and blackouts, have a much more connected city that can be cheaper for people to use, easier for people to operate within. And connecting these solutions together, creating much better business cases so that cities invest in the right way. Just a quick slide here. Big infrastructure projects take a long time. The other issue is measuring productivity, things like lost journey time by being stuck in traffic. Also, while can be fixed quickly, isn't very measurable at the moment. If we could measure better what's lost to Moscow's economy being stuck in traffic, you would immediately find much quicker and easier solutions. But actually, the issue around general automation, automated parking, intelligent traffic systems, smart grids connecting buildings are things that can be done quickly. I mean, within a year or 2 years. And they are things that we can now measure much better than we did before. And you put all of that together, you can use these measures and these scenarios to build long-term strategies, developing our infrastructure, improving the lives of our citizens, and embracing technology. And I'm sure Greg can go into much more detail about how you can turn that kind of measurement platform into a city strategy. Future scenarios, basically, future models, need to be meaningful to citizens. Every Muscovite deserves better journey times, more reliability with their energy supply, better public services. These are the things that we measure. These are the things that are important to our citizens. And any lost time doing worthless things needs to be eliminated, and our measures need to be focused on those things. And let me just conclude with this. These are my children. This is Tessa, Jacob, and Albert, and my chickens. And I actually need to update this picture because I've gained a child and lost a chicken since this. But this is to show you what 80 litres of water looks like, okay? This is the water use per person per day that we should aspire to in order to have an efficient water supply, a cheap water supply for our city, and ensure fresh water for all. If I told you that in the US they use 280 litres per person per day, in Europe we use 220 litres per person per day, even in Africa 180 litres per person per day. So we really need to think as individuals what our role is. These measurement platforms need to involve citizens in these measures and get us to think about what our role and how we can move going forward, so cities can really keep up with the pace and scale of change that is needed. Spasibo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, for an interesting speech. It's really an interesting angle of linking the rankings, the quality of life and infrastructure. I think we need a separate session on that. But in the interest of time, I will ask a question on your speech to Ms. Ortega, if you don't mind. So if we talk about sustainability as one of the kind of important direction in rankings and in measuring cities, the general impression is that cities in emerging countries and emerging countries in general don't treat sustainability as too important of a measure. So what is your view on that, and whether how do you think whether green rankings, sustainability rankings are really kind of important or gaining importance for the emerging world cities?
Thank you, Vasily. But first, I would just like to mention that I was involved in the Green City Index that Martin just mentioned, which he said is now outdated. They had 4 of these. One was the Asian Green City Index, where I was involved in, having been Secretary General of CityNet, which is an association of cities in Asia Pacific. And here, we compared 22 cities in Asia. And of course, you have the European Green City Index, where 30 cities were compared. Thank you. And we had one for Latin America, one for Africa. And one of the things that I would like to say was that the cities, when they learned that these indexes, like there were 8 particular indices, are necessary for the sustainability of a city, then they started looking at themselves. Even though they were not included in the study, based on the study, then they started studying and judging their performance so that they were able to find out, would they then be benchmarked against this? Would they fail or will they not? But one of the importances of this studies would be that it serves as a mirror to the cities. Are you sustainable? Are you now growing according to what we wish we should be? And the first question is also, what do you want to dream for your city? You mentioned you had 200 indices. You know, just to go over these 200 indices for a small city would be a very big problem. But in fact, you have Bhutan, who probably went over these 200 indices, and they said, we don't want that. What we want for our city is GNH, not GNP, the gross national happiness. For them, gross national happiness is more important than money. So with these indices that we read about, cities are then able to decide what are the priorities among these indices as far as they are concerned. They may be judged as being the laggards on some indices, but if what they want is they are now on top, is as far as being happy is what they want, then these are then the arrows, or shall we say this is now the way forward on how they would grow. And so, like the question was asked, what would you want for Moscow? Now, of course, I come from a very small city. I was the mayor of a very small city of only 120,000, and I have no right at all to tell a big city of 13 million people on what it should be. But not any big city can do the same, because only the people of Moscow should be the ones to say what indices count for them. What are these indices that would make their city sustainable? And as the question again was asked of Greg, they said, is it a matter of performance or a matter of perception? I would like to say that performance definitely is very important, but as we know, perception also counts a lot. And one of the things that we in ICLEI, which is an association of cities in 80 countries, in fact, the members of ICLEI would be 12 mega cities, we have 100 super cities, we have 450 large cities, but we also have the medium-sized and small cities. And one of the things perhaps that Moscow can do is to be part of these global networks so that they can then reach out, that they should not only look within, they should also learn to share with others, because they have the strengths which other cities may want to learn from. They can be the resource cities, and by being sharing, then their perception would also be better globally. An example of this is Yokohama.
Mary Jean, I'm very sorry, but we are short of time, so 30 seconds more. And
Okay, well, with Yokohama, they hosted CityNet for 25 years. So they were able to highlight their strengths. And the small cities who wanted to learn from them became members, and they learned. So, city-to-city cooperation. Thank you.
thank you very much. We have less than 20 minutes left, and we have 3 more speakers, so let's be to the point. And I give the floor to Mr. Mendoza Peña with the Global Rankings City. Global City Index. Global Cities Index, right?
There you go. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. In my brief presentation, I'm going to share with you how our ranking came to life. I'm going to also share with you some of the results, overall results of our index, and then I'm going to finish with some specific results of Moscow and the implications into the future. So today we are discussing how all these, even hundreds of rankings and studies influence civic leaders and business leaders. But when more than 7 years ago, we at A.T. Kearney started to realize the relevance of cities, we found that there were no comprehensive and holistic fact-based perspective on this topic. there were many opinions, but there was no fact-based approach. So with that in mind, we decided to develop our Global Cities Index. And the intention behind our study was to inform improvement plans and investment decisions being made by urban and business leaders. Today, our study is comprised of two companion efforts, the Global Cities Index and the Emerging Cities Outlook. And with the index, what we track is the current performance of cities. And with the Outlook, we look into the future, tracking the potential of cities to gain a stage in the global stage. In the Global Cities Index, today we track more than 80 cities, and we measure what we believe makes a global city. And it's the ability to attract, retain, and generate a global flow of people, capital, and ideas. On the other hand, in the Outlook, we look at the ability of cities to catch the leaders. And we look at a completely different set of indicators that are not lagging, but look into the future. So now let me tell you a bit about how the first of the efforts that we comprise in the study came to life. So we work with a group of academic advisors that include Saskia Sassen and Peter Taylor, among others, to define the characteristics of a global city. And once we define those characteristics that you can see on the screen, we derive the dimensions that we would use to measure the performance. And those are 5 dimensions around business activity, human capital, information exchange, cultural experience, and policy engagement. And these dimensions align and are matched against those characteristics of global cities. And then came perhaps one of the most challenging elements of developing a ranking, and I think we all have been hearing about that, which is to find the metrics that we are actually going to be measuring and tracking to look at the performance of the cities. And here we made a concerted effort to look at publicly available sources of information to ensure the objectivity of our study. And also, we leverage our global presence. A.T. Kearney has more than 60 offices around the globe, so that we use our local resources to validate the data gathering process in order to ensure the objectivity and accuracy of our results. But as Mr. Lemkin very rightly pointed out, many of the efforts being done today will have an impact 4 or 5 years down the road. And we realized that the index was very interesting and accurate to look at the current performance, the current situation. And with that perspective and the thinking of start to look into the future, last year we developed the Emerging Cities Outlook. Right now, this study is focused on a subset of cities from emerging countries, and we use the World Bank definition of low and middle income to determine which cities to include in the study. And we focus on, as I mentioned, leading indicators, those areas or those elements that we believe will influence or enable cities to attract, retain, and generate these global flows into the future. And as you can see, we focus on fewer areas. We focus on human capital, business activity, and innovation, because based on the dialogue with academic advisors and also the corporate advisors that we engage in the developing of the Outlook, we believe that these are the areas that are going to be defining the future performance of cities in the global stage. So now go to the results that you can see on page 5 of the presentation for both studies. On the left-hand side, you can see the historical results of the Global Cities Index, and on the right-hand side, you can see the results of the Global Cities Outlook. And on the Global Cities Index, we have the benefit of historical data, because we have been doing this since 2008. So let me share some of the key trends that we observe in this historical set of data. So first, what we found is that the top of the ranking is very stable, but there is fierce competition leading up to it. As you can see, New York has been consistently the #1 in the ranking, followed by London as #2. And even if you look at the top 7 cities, there has been hardly any movement there. But when you look at the top 10 and you start looking in the middle of the ranking between 20 and 40, that's where all the action happens, and that's where the fierce competition can be observed. Second, what we found is that cities are slowly catching up with the leaders. When we look at the scores, we are finding that the scores are converging, and not only that, we can also say that cities are becoming more global because the average scores are increasing. Lastly, in terms of the different dimensions that we track in the study, we found that human capital is becoming more evenly distributed over time, so the scores are becoming closer together. And on the other hand, information exchange pulls cities apart, perhaps highlighting how cities from emerging countries are struggling to catch up on technology fronts. Very quickly, I want to move on to Moscow. Moscow is performing fairly well. It has cemented its position in the top 20. In the last ranking, it ranked 17th. And here you can see the different positioning of Moscow across the 5 dimensions that we track in our study. And the little arrow shows the delta between the study in 2012 and the study in 2014. And when you look at the different areas, the different dimensions, we found different reasons why we see these changes. And the one that I want to highlight is business activity, in which Moscow decreased its positioning. When we look at the details behind the data, it's not because Moscow is dropping in any particular area, but it's because other cities are improving, and improving at a faster rate than what Moscow is. And this highlights a very important element of all the rankings. It's not good enough to maintain your performance, might not be even good enough to increase your performance. You have to do it at a faster rate than what other cities are doing. Then quickly, in human capital, Moscow performing very well. The improvement is driven mostly by an increase in inhabitants with tertiary degrees. Information exchange, the challenge that Moscow is facing in that dimension is censorship. In cultural experience, Moscow is doing extremely well. It's the area where it spikes, is the leader in museums, and is even improving in visual and performing arts. And then lastly, on political engagement, is an area where Moscow does extremely well, and even improving its positioning due to its presence in think tanks. So now quickly going to the last page about the implications for Moscow into the future, and continue with this twofold angle, these 2 lenses, perceptions and fundamentals of performance. On the perception side, Moscow has a very unique and extremely rich cultural heritage that it has to make sure that is communicated to enhance its global appeal. And then on the flip side, on information exchange, Moscow needs to be very proactive and head-on address the perception issues by conveying a very open and progressive image to the world. Now, in terms of fundamentals of performance, Moscow has the benefit of being the political center of gravity of Russia, and it has to leverage that asset to position itself in the center of the global political dialogue. And then lastly, the digital economy is going to be changing businesses, industries, and cities. And it's going to bring challenges and opportunities. Those cities that are proactive and form public-private partnerships to address the issues and capitalize on these opportunities that the digital economy is going to bring are the ones that are going to be the leaders in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Andres. Я предлагаю следующую.
I would like to suggest the following sequence. We have two more presentations to go through. I would like to give this floor to Mr. Grishenkov first, and then we'll take a chance to take a look at Evgeny's presentation, and also Sergey. As a lot of speakers has addressed, you would like to draw a line or come to a conclusion for the overall discussion. Now I would like to give this floor to Dmitry Grishenkov. Dmitry, you are now running, and you have created the most famous rating agency of Russia, and you maintain a number of indices like regional index, corporate development index, but you still don't have the city index. And now you have seen the presentation about the most famous city indexes. So what can you say about that?
We did our own ratings. We did it 12 years ago, and I believe that the successful rating it normally leads to calls when some people start calling you and swearing you for doing a wrong thing. But you see, now the last rating we introduced was not commented like this. We did a rating of Russian cities, and we actually decided that Russian cities are not prepared to be interested in ratings. And ratings are there where you have competition, first of all, and the competition between Russian cities doesn't exist, actually. And one governor told me, all your ratings are wonderful, but until we don't have any governor which was fired because his rating went down. So there is no actually impetus for the development and implementing these ratings. And when we spoke about it, and I'm very grateful for being invited here, because I know all these ratings, I monitor them all, and we learn them, and we see actually people who are behind these ratings, and they are authors of them. And I liked Mary Jane Ortega's comment when she said we need to look at indexes for specific cities, because each rating actually answers a specific question. But when we rate cities one after another, it's one thing. But who is the biggest? Who is the warmest? Who is the richest? And so on. But when and quite often we forget that there are some other issues which you spoke about. And Moscow, what are you competing for? Where do you want to be the leader? And what kind of questions you would like to ask? And then you need to monitor the ratings which are relevant to these goals. Therefore, as I said, Moscow is the leading city which is genuinely concerned of its rating, because previously I didn't see any interest from Moscow authorities. But Russia has several cities which can be rated, and some of them are called comfortable cities, comfortable for life. And I went to Krasnodar city. Krasnodar is one of the leading cities in these ratings. And why? I will not analyze it, but I asked the mayor of the city and say, you are the leader, but why don't I know any person who moves from Moscow to Krasnodar to live there? So it means that your ratings probably are not reflecting the actual state of things. If it is so comfortable to live in Krasnodar, everybody will go there, but we don't do it from Moscow. Maybe we are wrong. And I have still not much time to speak, but we do ratings in many areas. And tomorrow we will publish a rating of Russian regions, 19 different regions, and it is fiscal ratings and university ratings and so on. And I am in the board of managers for university ratings, and it is very useful thing to And I would like to suggest that the forum organizers should be initiators of such an international organization, which will unite these designers of ratings, and there are 200 of different ratings, and into one network. And I believe there should be some charter which will speak what the rating should explain, indicate, and how it can be applied. And with universities, we have these ratings, and parents and potential students are interested in it, and therefore maybe this venue can be used to launch this initiative, if not today, but maybe next year. Dmitry, thank you very much for your interesting idea. I am I'll think about it very carefully. I am among the organizers. And now, Evgeny Borisovich, Dridge, your presentation. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Dridze. I'll speak fast and because many things were already mentioned, but just a short remark. You can treat ratings in any way you like, but in my opinion, and judging by the results of collaboration with investors, we see that investors are actually looking at ratings, and you may ignore the fact, but if you do it, you will lose. Therefore, we are very happy that the government of Moscow treats ratings seriously, and this discussion is another proof to it. And we also treat seriously those indicators which people spoke about. And Moscow is on the rise in major ratings and all ratings. And the outcome is there on my slide, and some of them were mentioned already. But we need to add on top of this that apart from the attention to ratings, we pay attention to the perception of business of our capital. And here we have several issues. There is some disparity between how Moscow is perceived by those who work here and those who are outsiders, and you can see two graphs there. And on the left side, you can see that our transportation problem is well known, but it is not perceived as a major issue compared to other large international cities in the opinion of businesses we surveyed. And we did this survey with PwC. It has more than 500 respondents, and the questionnaire was long, and the conclusions were actual there and quite. And we believe that there is a 30% disparity between those who believe that Moscow is Moscow inside the city and those who work outside of Moscow. So we have still an issue of positioning Moscow abroad. And we exert a lot of efforts to promote Moscow, its positive image as a business city for international community. But there are several factors which are well known, which drag us behind. And these factors which are our advantages. And the respondents highlighted this. As for Moscow as a financial center, the dominant majority of our respondents said that in the coming 10 years, Moscow will develop as a regional financial center. And for us, it's a quite positive outcome, because to be an international financial center, you need to be first a regional center. And that completes my presentation. Thank you. Evgeny, many thanks. Sergey, I will ask you in conclusion. So we actually have exhausted our time, but what is the most exciting and interesting you heard today during our discussion, and to what extent it's relevant to Moscow? What was interesting for me? What was the sincerity of the speakers and the objective approach of our speakers with regard to Moscow and their perception of it, and what are the conclusions of this session for myself. And I just jotted them down, and I believe that we will continue more specifically with different, working with different rating agencies, and to improve the ratings, including those relating to quality of life, and the ideas from our lady commentator was very much to the point. And we will continue to be proactive in trying to prove that Moscow has its own specificity. And we also need to be very vigilant with regard to the original data and its bias. If rating puts awards places, the first, second, the 20th, it's a number, right? Then we need to study the numbers, and these numbers should be well proven. And we're talking about precision of mathematical actions. And we understand quite well that ratings help you in decision making. Decisions of some large international developer, or a decision taken by the mayor of the city or an official. But all these ratings have one common goal: to make life more comfortable for people, to develop human potential, and to improve life of the citizen of a particular city. And that's why we compare ourselves with best practices, with best cities. Therefore, a Muscovite, the resident of the city, a guest, a foreigner who came to Moscow, should be the key for us. And we know that these people feel more comfortable in Moscow with every passing year. And I believe this is a very good conclusion of this discussion. Thank you for international colleagues for the insight. Sergei, thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion. We spoke only about relatively small areas, and a lot of things can be discussed in depth, but the conclusion is the ratings should not be the goal in itself. They should be an instrument to support the strategy for urban development, and not only for Moscow, but for other cities. And I believe these ratings will help to formulate these strategies. Thank you, dear friends.